This review is going to be a little bit different because this game is a little bit different. What's good, internet? My name is Attack Slug, and welcome to a review of Moon on the Nintendo Switch, out now for a price of $18.99. Full disclosure, this copy of the game provided by the publisher, but extra full disclosure, I would have bought it anyway. And if they happen to do a limited run games variant physical edition, I will totally buy that. Also, a spoiler warning at the top, because this game is so heavy on the discovery and exploration facets, there might be some solutions in the video as I show it to you in this review, so keep that in mind as you watch, but I will do my best to not spoil it as I am talking through my review. I think if you were to pitch the idea of Moon in 2020 as an indie video game, that nobody would bat an eye. If you were to tell someone the idea of an anti-RPG with no combat, where you walked around and gathered love to eventually fly to the moon, then they'd say, hey man, it's 2020. You can do what you want. Video games can be anything, but here's the thing. Moon came out on the original PlayStation back in 1997, where these concepts were groundbreaking. And if you are interested in playing Moon, the number one thing I can tell you before you do anything else is to read the manual. That's right, kids. Video games used to have instruction manuals. Sometimes they were even in color, but because the game might not have explained everything you needed to know in the gameplay itself, reading the manual, very important. And so before you start, head over to the Moon website, download the PDF manual, and read that. Otherwise, you're probably gonna die repeatedly. Now then, Moon begins with a small boy playing his game station in his room all night long. I'm sure at some point in your life you could relate to having that kind of time. And he is playing a pretty standard looking 16-bit RPG with the hero in the armor. There was a dragon that ate the moon, a lot of exposition, and as you progress in the intro here, you are getting further and further into this game, but eventually you've been up all night, and mom says it's time to go to bed. So you turn off the game console at the last boss, God forbid, and try to go to bed. But wouldn't you know it, it's that age-old cliche of you got sucked into the TV and sucked into the game. And where most media with this particular trope would take you would be becoming the hero of the world as far as defeating the enemies and eventually winning and escaping back into your own home world. However, Moon, as I said, is different. There is no combat in this game. It is about finding the love. And make no mistake, there is a hero in this game. He is wandering around with his giant sword, slicing and dicing the creatures in the world to gain experience to eventually go fight that dragon. But your goal is not to fight things. Your goal is not to vanquish that hero. Your goal is to restore order into the world here. And so, collecting love, I hear you ask. How exactly do you collect love in Moon? Well, there are three ways. Number one is catching the souls of the animals who have been slain by the hero. There are 51 across the entire map you will explore. Each of the corpses out there in the world will give you a hint as to what you have to do to solve the puzzle to capture the soul and return it to its body. Once the soul is returned, here comes a little UFO, picks it up, and gives you some money. Actually, that's backwards, it's yenum. Number two is to help the people you encounter in this game world. Much like real life, everyone has their own problems and their own worries, and if you go find out exactly what they want or need, or just talk to them, you can find love that way. And number three is to just interact with the world around you, and you may find some surprising ways of finding love. For example, certain flowers might like certain music, and that will cause them to bloom and grow and give you love. And if all that sounds simple enough, well, here is the catch. In Moon, there is not only a day and night cycle, and every character and every creature is on their own routine, you also have 7 days of the week. And so to solve certain problems might be on a particular day of the week. It might be every day or every other day. So watching and recognizing, and more importantly, talking to everyone will help you establish what their routine is. And perhaps you are thinking that isn't so bad, but here's the additional wrinkle in this gameplay loop. You only have so much energy to complete these actions and talk to people before you eventually either have to sleep or you pass out and die. And if you pass out and die, you lose all of your progress. So sleeping is super important, much like in real life. And so when the game starts, it feels super limiting, right? But the catch is, the more love that you gain, the more action points you have, and the longer you can stay awake. This in turn makes that early game feel that much more meaningful because you feel like the world could be enormous. And then as you progress, hours and hours in, eventually you're up for like 5 or 6 days. I've been up for 6 days. I can see through time. And so it makes the progression that much more satisfying. But my advice early on, if you are stumped and you feel like you don't have enough AP to make it through anything, buy some bread, eat some cookies from your Granby every morning, and you should have enough to get through that early game portion. Now, it's not just the characters, not just the creatures, you also have an entire inventory system here. And at a certain point, it does start feeling like an old school point and click adventure game. Now, granted, you aren't combining items, but you will still have a whole host of things at a certain point you have no idea what to do with. But the name of the game here is truly explore and experiment. Show every item to every character. If it gives you the option to eat the item, try eating the item. Eventually, you will hit a point where it feels like you just don't know what to do because the puzzles are just very particular in nature, and my advice to you is do not look up a guide when you start. There's kind of only one thing you can really miss in the whole game, and that thing is only important if you want to get every single piece of love and hit level 30. Otherwise, my advice to you is to play for about 10 hours-ish, and then, if you are just that stuck at that point, go look up a guide. Because it really is about exploring the environment, and it really is the act of discovery that is the most satisfying part of Moon. My other advice is don't grind through a playthrough in like 2 or 3 days. You're gonna get burned out really easily because of the nature of the time loop of the game and having to wait for certain events. There is just a certain vibe and a certain mood that it does not behoove you to rush through this game. The words you will hear across the internet to describe this game and its story and content therein are words like weird, quirky, offbeat, unusual, charming. And the most important thing to me to get across in this review is that this game has a direct vision, and as a result of which, has a heart and soul to it. This is the anti-RPG. When you think of RPGs in and before 1997, this is subverting the genre. It is kind of the opposite of what Earthbound did, right? Earthbound took the very well-worn Dragon Quest combat mechanics and layered on an unusual setting for an RPG. Moon takes a very familiar fantasy setting and layers on unfamiliar mechanics for the gameplay. Having finally played Moon 23 years after its original release, I'm able to fully appreciate just how radical it was for its time and appreciate how much it influenced the games that came from people on this team afterwards and people making games now who played it at the time. But the real question that you have at this point is, does it hold up in 2020? Because nostalgia can cloud your vision, and games that at the time were amazing might not hold up years later, but you view them as better than they were because of nostalgia. But for a PS1 game, graphically, this holds up, and it holds up because the characters are sprites, and the backgrounds and the creatures are pre-rendered. There are a lot of PS1 games that don't hold up because of polygons. Thankfully, we avoid that here. Now, the soundtrack is just as wild and as eclectic as the game itself, and it does something for a 97 that is absolutely wild. When you start playing Moon, outside of a few areas like the castle and Granby's house, there is no music. You have to get far enough into the game to find the record shop to buy the MDs, and then once you buy the MDs, which are the songs on the soundtrack, you can then order them in any order you want and put them on a playlist and then shuffle through it. Anytime you are tired of a song, beep beep, there you go, new song. It's fantastic. I don't think I've seen any other game from this era do anything quite like that. Now, could this port have used some quality of life adjustments? Sure. Any game from this era could use some quality of life adjustments. But I think the school of thought that won out here is that preserving the game in its original format is more important than adding any kind of an update to it in 2020. So it was key to preserve that original vision from '97, warts and all. But I will say there are definitely advantages to having this game on Switch. Number one being the screenshot function. So given the nature of some of these puzzles and things you're going to have to memorize, having those screenshots easily available to you on the Switch is super important. I mean, sure, you can also get a pen and paper, but it's right there built into the system and it works fantastically. Number two, there is one notorious minigame in particular that has a rocket ship and is extraordinarily difficult because it was originally designed for a CRT TV. And the input lag you would not have on a CRT TV. But trying to play it on my big old 4K didn't work so well. However, on the Switch, play it in handheld mode. There's almost no input lag, and I beat it pretty easily in handheld mode. But a handful of minor annoyances does not hold back Moon from being an absolutely unforgettable and amazing experience. Having first played games like Tulip and Little King's Story and Contact and Rule of Rose, and now having played Moon, I get it. It all traces back to Moon. Now, while I certainly hope a lot more people discover this game, I also understand this game is not for everyone. And there are valid criticisms you can lobby against the actual act of gameplay here, whether it be the walking speed, the lack of extensive fast travel, there is some, but not a lot, and the very deliberate pacing of the game. This is a handcrafted world where everything has a place and everything is in its place. And they have layered enough interactions in each block of time that as long as you are in the right area or zone, there's always something to do. But I can certainly sympathize if you've spent an entire day walking around and nothing important has happened. But that in and of itself is kind of inherent to what type of game this is, much like a Majora's Mask, much like a Deadly Premonition. But if you have just a little bit of patience, I think it all pays off. And honestly, even explaining the core game mechanics seems kind of quaint, because Moon is a game that is trying to make you feel something. It is more than just the sum of its parts. It is trying to evoke a reaction, even if that reaction is, oh god, that's what the baker's been hiding? Ugh. And so I would wager a guess that having a love for the offbeat and unusual is going to affect how much enjoyment you get from Moon. Moon is more than just a historical curiosity. It was an indie game before we had indie games. It was an art house game before anyone even thought that could be a thing. It is a 100% must play, even in calendar year 2020. If you have any affinity for games that think outside the box, for games a little bit outside the norm, for anything unorthodox altogether, Moon is a game you need to play. Once it clicks hard. It resonates. It is the kind of experience with a video game, to quote Pusha T, if you know, you know. It absolutely challenges the notion of what a game can be or even should be. Moon is a game that is full of hope and whimsy, yet somehow still melancholy and a little dark. Moon is also a game where I ingested 5 different kinds of magic mushrooms and tripped my balls off, and also drank some very questionable liquor from some xylophone-playing monkeys. Those things both happened. And hold on a minute, playa. Is that Mario? It is my sincere hope that Moon gets ported to PC and PS4 and Xbox and anything under the sun, because more folks need to experience the love that is Moon. In terms of overall playtime for this game, that depends on just how much love do you want to earn. I'd say Moon took me about 20 or 23 hours to complete, but I did literally everything and got to level 30 love level. You don't need to do that. The ending you will get at not being level 30 is the same ending you will get being level 30. please save yourself the frustration of the fishing tournament unless you absolutely need to see everything in this game. But for me, it's been 23 years and I wanted to savor every last drop of this game. And if I was writing this review in 1997, it would absolutely be a 10 out of 10. But I'm here talking to you on a video on YouTube in the year 2020. And for as terrible as this year has been for the planet, Moon is a shining beacon of hope and love in that trash fire that is 2020, and a tax slug is going to give Moon 9 out of 10. In conclusion, I want to thank Onion Games for making all this happen in the first place. I want to thank the Switch being the console of miracles and making the impossible possible, and I want to thank you out there on the internet for watching this review. Do me a favor and spread the love.